This episode of Bullet Heaven was made using Pack-a-Punch SCART cables from Retro Gaming Cables. In Bullet Heaven number 314, we took a look at a scrappy little bullet hell boss rush called Dangan GB. It's a super cool game, but it's not the only modern shooter on the venerable Game Boy. Newcomer Incubate Games, a division of RetroModding.com, has launched a whole new line of high-quality physical Game Boy games, and their inaugural title is a whole new handheld shmup. Genesis definitely looks the part. Its high-quality silver-trimmed box, black cardboard insert, manual, included sticker sheet, and slick black cartridge give it a super premium look and feel. It's great to see this kind of attention to detail and build quality in Incubate's new releases. But what about the game? Well, in this episode of Bullet Heaven, we're taking an in-depth look at Genesis on the original Game Boy. Genesis is a vertically scrolling shoot-'em-up developed in 2020 by 7FH and published physically in October 2021 by Incubate Games. We'll be 100% honest here, this is a pretty straightforward game, even for the Game Boy, but there are at least a couple of interesting wrinkles. Let's take a closer look. The gameplay in Genesis is almost as simple as it gets. Players move their space fighter with the D-pad and fire their weapons with the A button. The player's movement is smooth but perhaps a bit slower than we'd like, and it's still more than adequate for the kind of gameplay that Genesis sports. Various enemy types will approach the player from the top of the screen, which will obviously need to be dealt with by giving them the old pew pew pew. In this case, literally. Every now and again, a power-up will drop which will equip a more powerful shot type when collected. Some have a much higher power but slower fire rate, while others have a faster rate of fire or wider range but much weaker shot power. Any collected weapon will fill a gauge in the bottom status bar indicating how much ammunition is left. It'll only deplete when firing. When empty, the player's fire will reset to its default value. Defeated enemies can also sometimes drop a nuke, which will clear away all enemies on screen or damage bosses. Only one of these single-use items can be held at a time and can be deployed with the B button. If the player ends up getting hit, they'll sustain damage which is deducted from their life total in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. This gauge can be recovered by collecting shield pickups, but if the gauge is depleted, the player will die and game over will occur. There is no option to continue. Genesis plays over the course of 4 somewhat short stages. Each stage is capped off with a rather tame boss that offers a slightly greater challenge than the stage proper, but can generally be overcome with only minimal effort. It will not take long at all for most players to get through the entire game, despite basically only having 1 life and no continues at game over. When the game is completed, a hard mode is then opened up, boosting its replay value slightly, but generally speaking, there isn't a lot here that really grips us. Genesis is a competent enough game, but unfortunately it's kind of boring. Looking at it another way, when a Game Boy shmup fails to even measure up to Nintendo's Solar Striker from 1990, something has to give. We feel that there are multiple factors that contribute to this, which we'll get into shortly, but at the very least, the gameplay works well enough not to be bad. It's just not electrifying. Genesis features a very rudimentary scoring system that awards points purely from enemy destruction. Collecting power-ups does nothing to boost the player's tally. One thing that is rather neat about Genesis though is that the player's high score is saved and displays on the title screen regardless of whether the game is shut completely off or removed from the Game Boy. This obviously warranted investigation, and popping open the cartridge reveals that no batteries are employed in the PCB design. This means that flash memory saves the player's score, ostensibly allowing it to last forever. This could be the most interesting aspect of the entire game. We hope more new games for retro consoles could employ flash memory in lieu of finite batteries. But as for the scoring itself, it's simple, it works, but it's not mind-blowing. We've said time and time again that a stellar presentation can elevate a mediocre game significantly. Likewise, a great game can also be dragged down by a less than stellar one. Unfortunately, Genesis suffers from the latter. With exceptionally plain visuals, very little in the way of visual enemy variants, and a humdrum soundtrack that hinges a little too much on the same musical hooks, which end up sounding like a sluggish 8-bit Lady Gaga. The sights and sounds of Genesis don't exactly improve the experience. In fact, the BGM actually kind of harms it. The soundtrack in particular is the fatal flaw to the entire package, a slow, dull slog when what's really needed is an upbeat BGM with more complex rhythm, depth, and texture. In the end, the game itself is wholly unremarkable with regards to its visuals and sound. To be completely fair, the strongest aspect of Genesis's presentation is Incubate's excellent physical materials and build quality. So, taking all of this into consideration, how does Genesis on the Game Boy stack up? Let's take a look. Genesis controls smoothly enough, though the ship feels a little on the sluggish side. From a challenge standpoint, a couple of attempts are all that's really needed to get through Genesis. It's a 1cc by default though, there are no options to continue. Genesis plays over the course of 4 stages and ends rather abruptly. The final boss doesn't look or feel like a final boss. Serviceable but dull. The visuals in Genesis won't set the world on fire. They are clear and move smoothly though. Dull and plodding, the soundtrack in Genesis is boring to put it nicely. And familiar. If you know, you know. The game itself is boilerplate and simple. The flash-based high score though, that's a great idea we want to see more of. With its moderate cost of over 60 Canadian dollars, Genesis offers only an iffy value. Collectors might dig its physical presentation, but the game is still a dud. Of all of the Game Boy shooters I've played so far, and I've played many over the past 30 years, this has to be the least engaging one. Stacking up against even Solar Striker, it just doesn't measure up. We wish it wasn't so, especially with the excellent physical release, but when the chips are down, Genesis is kinda questionable. You can try Genesis for yourself at itch.io. New batches for Genesis are forthcoming on the Incubate website, and links as always can be found in the description. Speaking of questionable releases, there have been some unfortunate developments with Panoramic Cotton, so we'll have to wait on a patch. We'll weigh in soon though. Until then though, let's take a look at a new limited run reissue. Special Cybernetic Attack Team SCAT is coming up next on Bullet Heaven.